In business news today, 3 things to know. First, big pay to play. Why the LA Clippers, a $2 billion deal, is the biggest league the league has ever seen. It's going to shake up the NBA. And cash cow. Despite a series of recalls, General Motors is raking in the dough, taking in more than $22 billion since filing for bankruptcy. Who's really footing the bill? Then, fleeing the green. Why hundreds of thousands of golfing enthusiasts are hanging up their clubs and saying goodbye to the sport. Arisexchange starts right now. Hello, I'm Julian Phillips in for Andrew Smirch. Record high closings for the Dow and the S&P 500 today, despite stocks sliding in afternoon trading today. This after report showed consumer spending and sentiment fell more than economists have expected. We'll get to more of that in a moment. But first, Steve Ballmer leading the pack to buy the LA Clippers from embattled owner Donald Sterling and his wife, Shelley. This is big news. Well, it's not really a done deal yet, folks, but the former Microsoft exec is the frontrunner after bidding a record $2 billion for the team. Well, sports business analyst and Oppenheimer co-executive director Stephen Colavito joins us now and says the NBA likes the idea as Ballmer as the owner. Steve, welcome to the show.
Julian, it's great to be back.
$2 billion. I mean, this is the second biggest, I think, deal or exchange if it happens in sports history. Of course, the biggest in the NBA. I mean, the Sterlings purchased this franchise for less than, $17 million, now $2 billion. Why so much money?
It was actually, they bought the team for $12 million, and to kind of put this into perspective, just a few weeks ago, the Milwaukee Bucks were sold for a record $550 million. So we're talking about now 4 times that amount. Most of us in the sports banking world expected the team to be sold in and around $1 billion. Commissioner Silver thought that a $1 billion level would be kind of where the team would be sold. Grant Hill put together a group that put in a bid for $1.2 billion. So this is beyond anything that I think any of us thought that the team would fetch.
Well, we're going to get back to the money in a minute, Steve, but the bottom line here is this is really not a done deal yet. I heard reports earlier today that Donald Sterling says he does not want to sell this team. Where does the truth lie in all this?
Well, so a week ago, I was talking to Andrew on your show about how Donald had turned over possession and control to his wife, Shelley. What we didn't know at the time is that Shelley was kind of working on 2 different fronts. Not only did she get the control of the team, but also she basically then went to the foundation and the trust of the company that has control, so that this ownership is in a family trust, and basically ruled Donald Sterling mentally unfit. So by doing that, now she has control over the sale of this team, and it is going to be incredibly difficult for him to stop it. He actually sent a 36-page retort to the NBA. But from a legal perspective, he just doesn't have a lot of room to maneuver at this point. To
say the least, we're still waiting for the NBA. Of course, the owners have to vote on all this. I think everybody was certain that they're going to say that Sterling has to sell this team. But what about the possibility of Ballmer moving this team? There's some talk that he might want to move the LA Clippers to Seattle. Can that happen?
Well, I would say that he'd like to do it. Remember last year he was trying to buy the Sacramento Kings. And that's actually going to make this deal pretty efficient because he's already been approved and vetted by the NBA and the NBA owners. So they're comfortable with Steve Ballmer from that perspective. But if he were to move the Clippers to Seattle, first of all, he'd have to get approval from the NBA. I don't think that's going to happen. And then secondly, with the money that he's going to pay to the team, it would diminish the value by moving them up to Seattle. So I don't see him doing a move. It just doesn't make any business sense at this point.
Well, let's talk about business sense for a minute. We've got a minute left here. Magic Johnson likes this deal. Other NBA players say they like this deal. But economically, is this a good deal? $2 billion. I mean, that seems like an extraordinary amount of money.
It is, and I would say that I think it's more of ego than it is of valuation. To be frank, they've never appeared in a conference final. They've never been in a league championship, and The other thing that's interesting about the Clippers is that they don't have ownership in the Staples Center. They just rent it. So they don't get any concessions. They don't get anything that's outside of when the Clippers are playing. So it isn't, Steve Ballmer is going to pay an awful lot of money to sit courtside. I think, he's worth $10 billion, so this is 20% of his net worth. He's doing it on his own. Other tech giants have had success, like Mark Cuban,
right.
Have had success being owners, but it's a hefty price to pay, and I don't think from a valuation perspective,
right.
talking dollars and cents, this makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Look, we're going to keep our eyes on this. Of course, the drama continues. Stephen Colavito, thank you so much, sir.
Have a great weekend.
Okay, you too. All right, now for U.S. economic data causing some concern today. The Commerce Department says consumer spending dipped 0.1%, which was the first decline since April of 2013. Analysts say the decline is temporary due to the strengthening jobs market. And consumer confidence falls in May. The Thomson Reuters University of Michigan's reading on the overall index on consumer sentiment came in at 81.9, down from 81.4 the month before. Now for a look at the markets, how the markets did today. Record high closings, folks, from the Dow and the S&P 500. The Dow closing at 16,717. The S&P 500 closing at 1923. And the NASDAQ ended the day at 4242. And here's a look at the stocks we are watching today. Google says it will accept requests for Europeans who want to clean up their image by erasing unflattering information from the results of a Google search. Google closing down at $569.47. Well, shares of Apple soared to an intraday 78-week high today in the anticipation of its annual developers conference in San Francisco. Starting on Monday, Apple closing down to $633.64. And Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg, his wife Priscilla Chan, says they're donating $120 million to public schools in California. My goodness. The money will be distributed to Bay Area schools through their foundation, Startup Education. Facebook closing down at $63.20. Now for a look at commodities. Gold closing at $1,251.30 and oil closing at $102.91. Well, the big question, folks, can the economy maintain its recent momentum despite news from the U.S. economy shrank for the first time in 3 years during the first quarter? Well, of course, for that answer, we go to our economic guru, Peter Rockwell Global Capital's Peter Cardillo. Peter, thank you for coming in today.
Good to be back.
And walking from Wall Street all the way up here, getting rid of that pastrami sandwich you had earlier.
Exactly. Needed to work that off.
You know, look, consumer spending for the first time in April in a year, but personal income climbed. Are you surprised by this?
No, personal income has been, on a royal hand. It's been coming in pretty good. In fact, I think that's one of the reasons why we saw the savings rate actually go up. It appears that Americans are beginning to save a little bit more now, and that's a good sign. Of course, we had spending, which was off a bit, but I really don't put too much into that because, the previous reading, we saw a revision up by 0.1%, so this decline really doesn't amount to very much, and I don't think it obviously establishes a trend. I think the consumer is going to continue to spend, and we've seen that in other economic indicators.
I would assume that you're certainly not concerned about the economy at this point.
No, I'm not. I think, we're geared towards growth at 3%, north of 3% in Q2, and I think we'll continue to grow at between 2.75 and 3% for the remainder of the year. So
that's not bad.
No, so basically we're looking at this year, excluding the first quarter, maybe around 2.5% growth to 2.25% growth, which is not, overly an aggressive growth rate, but certainly a growth rate that it will keep the flames of the market on automatic pilot, you might say.
Are you concerned about inflation?
No, not at all. I mean, we had some inflation during the winter months, but that was basically due to transitory inflation, energy and food prices, so the inflation is not a problem. Certainly, the bond market doesn't think it's a problem.
Obviously not. Well, I've got to ask you, we've seen somewhat of a roller coaster here and there in the first quarter, but why do stocks continue to go up, despite all this mixed economic data that we're getting?
Yeah, well, there are two reasons. Actually, there are three reasons. One, obviously, low interest rates. So this market does not offer an alternative in terms of investing. Second, earnings are still coming in, and even though perhaps maybe in certain situations valuations might be a little overextended, generally speaking, the S&P valuations are more or less in line with earnings, and so that's not a problem. And the third is that next week the European Central Bank will probably pull the trigger. In one form or another. There'll be quantitative easing,
right?
And that just means more liquidity. So there's a lot of cash, more cash coming, and even though that cash will probably favor the European markets,
right,
obviously, it'll also favor the U.S. market, just like we favored the emerging markets.
That'll have to be the last word, and I like that tie.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Coming up, rolling in the dough, why General Motors is making the bank, folks, and are taxpayers footing the bill. You're watching Arisexchange. Stay with us.
Mainstream news has covered all of the issues of the world, which are like this, through a very narrow lens. And at Arise News, we do things different. We cover every culture, every angle. Our mission is to go to these places, to these communities, whether they're in Africa, whether they're in Europe, Asia, the United States, the Caribbean. And we're going to find these stories, and we're going to tell them to our audience. Stories that they probably never heard of before, and stories that they'll find interesting and engaging.
Welcome back to Arisexchange. Lots of news in the auto industry this week. An additional 4 recalls issued involving nearly 1.4 million vehicles, this time Ford Motors, as we talked about a little bit yesterday. And General Motors claiming record profits, making it one of the most profitable companies in the world, despite filing for bankruptcy 5 years ago and its massive recalls this year. How do you figure? Well, we turn now to Lauren Fix, the car coach, for more on all this. Lauren, this just seems crazy. All these recalls, General Motors, record profits. How do you explain this?
Well, you think about General Motors and the product that they've been revamping over the years. Remember 5 years ago when they were going bankrupt, the product could use a reface. And the reface of the product, especially in the Cadillac and in the Buick lineup, you see some really great product coming out. And people that are true GM enthusiasts are still buying. And really where they're making their profits is from China. That is a huge chunk of their business. And so they have taken the taxpayer money, and unfortunately for us, they've made the profit, and we took the $10 billion loss as taxpayers.
We're talking about $10.6 billion loss. This is absolutely ridiculous here. And it seems like the only winners here, perhaps, are the unions in all this, at least in part.
Absolutely. Well, they had retirement plans that they had agreements with. Those had to be fulfilled first. So the unions did make out in this deal, and that's part of the current administration. That's who helped get him into office. And so President Obama, of course, his team was part of that, and they had their cars are involved. But in addition to that, we didn't just lose money from GM. Even Chrysler, we took a hit when they basically gifted Chrysler to Fiat, and they've turned around their brand as well. And you look at their profit margins, and, the taxpayers lost $1.3 billion in the bailout of Chrysler, who they made, money off of us, too.
We're talking about a total loss by taxpayers of about $700 billion. That's huge.
It's huge, yes. I'd like to get a loan like that myself, but and let someone else take the loss. But when the government gets involved and it's too big to fail, they keep pouring more money into it. And unfortunately, when GM had their IPO, they did it too early. They came in at around $34 a share, and they needed to get it up to $52 in order to even break even. We never have gotten close to that number, and even today, the stock is not strong enough. We've had 30 recalls. That's going to put a little bit of a dampening on it. But the big sales for GM and where you're seeing those huge profit margins is them selling vehicles in China that is going to be the largest marketplace for automobiles. And reason number two is here in the U.S., but soon you're going to watch India come up strong as well.
Okay, but here's the deal, though. We were talking about this in other parts of Arise News. What's going on there in China, the whole situation with pollution now? They're putting more stringent controls on cars. Cars can't go into certain areas there because of pollution they're trying to cut down. Won't that affect sales in some form or fashion for GM?
The thing is, it's almost a sign of success to have an American car in China, which almost seems silly when they have their own brands there, such as Chery and a couple of the other brands. I think the thing is they're already planning on taking 6 million cars off the road. These are older cars that potentially pollute. They are big fans of electric vehicles. However, they're not selling there either. So you're going to start seeing more hybrid vehicles being sold there. And one of the big players in the game, besides Toyota, is General Motors. So you're going to see a lot of success there for GM. I don't think that their sales are going to drop off. It's just there's so many people there, and everybody wants to own a car because it looks like you're doing well.
Well, I got to tell you, I'm going to keep my eyes on this one here because I think, GM may hit a bump when it comes to sales over there. Maybe you don't agree with me, but I just think that that's the case, Lauren.
We'll watch. They're building plants there right now. Everybody's building plants. Volkswagen, Audi, GM, Ford, Toyota. They want to sell to that marketplace. They have to build cars for the size that fits their roads. Their roads are really packed. If you think we have rush hour traffic in New York, it's nothing compared to Beijing.
Okay.
So when you start thinking about how many cars are on the road, they do fail. They do need to be replaced. And so they're taking old cars off the road so people will buy new cars.
All right, those clunkers. Anyway, that's the last word. Lauren Fix, as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, time now for our business ticker stories making news around the world. Veteran Affairs Secretary Eric Shinseki has resigned over the growing scandal involving sometimes deadly waits for care at VA hospitals. President Obama, who met earlier today with Shinseki, had this to say about the retired Army general's resignation.
As he told me this morning, the VA needs new leadership to address them. He does not want to be a distraction, because his priority is to fix the problem and make sure our vets are getting the care that they need. That was Rick's judgment on behalf of his fellow veterans. And I agree. We don't have time for distractions. We need to fix the problem.
The calls for Shinseki's resignation snowballed in recent days from across the political spectrum. He will be replaced on an interim basis by VA Deputy Secretary Sloan Gibson. BNP Paribas, France's biggest bank, is reportedly facing a $10 billion fine. The U.S. Justice Department is pushing the bank to plead guilty of violating U.S. sanctions against Iran and other blacklisted countries and is seeking one of the biggest penalties ever imposed on a bank. A $10 billion fine would be more than 5 times the biggest amount paid by a bank to settle allegations of violating U.S. sanctions. Well, SpaceX CEO Elon Musk unveiled the company's latest spacecraft. Look at this. A 7-passenger capsule known as the Dragon V2 is equipped with side-mounted thrusters and legs to allow it to land vertically without the need for a one-way. This is neat. NASA is already using an unpiloted version of the Dragon to shuttle cargo back and forth from the International Space Station, but Musk hopes NASA will also want to use this new version as a reusable ride for astronauts. Since NASA retired its space shuttle fleet 3 years ago, the American Space Agency has been dependent on Russian spacecraft to fly its astronauts into orbit. They need that for the next summer blockbuster. Anyway, there's plenty of money spent on illegal drugs and prostitution. That's why the United Kingdom and Italy are now calculating both into their gross domestic product. The British government announced that paying for drugs and sex adds nearly $17 billion a year to their economy. Italy made a similar announcement last week that it would begin measuring narcotics and sex work in its GDP. Ahead, renewable energy and its global impact. You're watching Arisexchange.
I think media and reporters have a lot to answer for.
AIDS, hunger, people not having running water, the things that we just take for granted.
I think the most important issues in the world today are education and poverty.
Terrorism and war, I guess, is always. It's always an issue, and the quality of life of certain groups of people in certain areas.
I think inequality.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Welcome back to Arisexchange. Well, there's been a debate going on for quite some time about the importance of renewable energy and the need for energy companies to generate electricity from renewable energy sources like wind, water, and solar power. Many states have already enacted laws to enforce just what, and one company at the forefront of helping to provide renewable energy sources globally is LMA. CEO Rani Fridrich joins us now to tell us why renewable energy is so important. I've got to say, welcome to the show, number one. Was Al Gore right in all this in terms of climate change?
I don't know if he was right, but I think it's very important to use sustainability is very important, and to use renewable energy is part of it.
In terms of renewable energy, what should we be looking for? Should it be solar power, or should it be some other source of renewable energy? What is most efficient in your mind?
It depends on the geography, actually. There are places that solar power is the most useful. There are places for wind, geothermic. It depends on the geographical area.
President Obama will be releasing a report on his climate change plan. How does that, or how would that affect renewable energies and companies that might want to invest in this?
I tell you, I'm more familiar with Europe, and Europe is very supporting the renewable energy industry. That's why Europe is actually leading. Germany, for example, is the leader in the world using photovoltaic, using the sun, even though they are not rich with sun. Wind power is powering most of Europe. And I know that the US is lagging after the rest of the world.
My question here, though, and I harp on this all the time, is the whole issue of money. You still have a lot of companies that are making billions of dollars off of fossil fuels. You even have a situation over there with the crisis in the Ukraine, where European countries and some of the U.S. Western allies are reluctant to be so hard on Russia because they rely so much on gas. When are we going to wean ourselves off this gas, or when can we get companies like big oil companies to back down and have other companies that have renewable energy sources come and be prominent and be the prominent companies when it comes to getting our energy?
Actually, I think this will never happen because you will always need some reliable source of energy. And when you're talking about wind, it's not predictable. You're talking about sun, sometimes it's a cloudy day. So because energy is so important, electricity is so important to our life, no one can afford himself even 10 minutes without electricity. So the base load will be always with fossil or atomic. Nuclear power.
I was watching a commercial the other day where they actually had, I've seen some of these wind
turbine.
Yeah, they have some that are actually in the ocean. My thing is, if you have these fans, these big windmills in areas where you have a constant flow, like the Gulf Stream, or some sort of stream, in the water, it seems to me that would be constant energy and would be more predictable, wouldn't you think?
It would be more predictable, but not predictable enough to rely on it as 100% of the energy that we are using.
What is the balance here? I mean, we've got less than a minute left. What is the balance here between fossil fuels that we are still using, building more pipelines, and renewable energy?
I think that you can expect 30-40% renewable energy. The rest will be or nuclear or fossil or other way. Because the problem is how to storage energy, actually. As long as you will not be able to storage energy and deal with the peak of demand, you will need the conventional way of producing energy, which is, unfortunately, fossil.
You say 30 to 40%. How soon can we see that output?
I think Europe is already there. Germany, there are some days that 100% or more than 100% of the production is coming from renewable energy.
Well, that's good news. All right, well, we hope to see that here. Rani Fridrich, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
All right, next, in a hole, why golfers are leaving the green. Up next when Arisexchange returns.
I think that people in America do care about what happens throughout the world.
Global warming is probably something that has to be addressed sooner rather than later.
In Somalia, the genocide there, and that's something people don't know about. They have no idea the brevity of that situation.
The first thing I think about when I think of Africa is like war and famine and disease.
And right now with the tsunami that happened or the earthquakes in, Japan, we always look out for other people.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
I'm loving this segment, folks. The forecast for the golfing industry around the world isn't looking very bright. Well, in the U.S. alone, 5 million players, 5 million have left the game over the last decade. More golf courses closed than opened last year for the 8th year in a row. Now, as a result, companies that make and sell golf equipment are suffering, and that's not good. But here to talk to us about what's causing the decline is Alan Adamson, Managing Director at Landor Associates. Now, I got to tell you something. I mean, I really don't want to say this to the businesses, but I am jumping for joy. I'm a golfaholic,
Less crowded.
Less crowded. I'm loving it.
You're alone.
Look, I could get around the golf in maybe 3 or 4 hours as opposed to like the 10.
No one coming up behind you?
To say the
You're
least.
not waiting for the next time.
4.
Exactly.
Okay, why the decline, though? I mean, golf was on the rise, so popular for a while.
A lot of factors, a lot of big consumer trends. People moving to cities. It's harder and more expensive to play in urban areas. Business changing. 3 martini lunches gone. Doing business on the golf course, difficult.
Really?
Millennials multitasking.
Those millennials.
I'm surprised you're not answering emails while you talk to me.
Well, I'm not a millennial. I'm glad you think I look that young, but I'm a baby boomer.
So multitasking, doing more things, and all these things, and it's an expensive sport.
Oh, no, there's no question about it. Outside of that, people like me who already have golf clubs are less prone to buy a whole lot of new equipment. Is that part of it?
Yeah, once you've got a set, you're not trading up, but that first game is an expensive game to play.
What about all the new technology, though, for those of us who are trying to cure our slices and hooks?
Well, there's always hope that the club will make the difference.
Yeah, well, of course.
And the final thing is the sport is missing Tiger. They don't have a iconic celebrity driving attention.
How much of an influence economically did Tiger have on the game of golf?
A huge amount. He was a focal point. He was a story. He attracted interest. The sport is without a spokesperson right now, even though you have a lot of very talented players. Any sport needs to be aspirational for young people, and I think golf is suffering from that on top of everything else.
But you take a look at other sports. There was a time when, for instance, basketball was on the decline. Then came along Magic and Bird, and that kind of ignited the sport again. I think basketball is doing pretty well. What would it take to really ignite golf again? Because you have a lot of great players on the scene.
I don't think it's one thing that's impacting. The trends are global, and there are a lot of macro trends going on. But a few unexpected stories that have a story beyond how well they did on the game. Underdogs always do well in sports.
Well, this is true. In terms of dollars and cents, what are we talking about in terms, you're talking about manufacturers losing money, or what about TV?
Television is viewers, golf clubs, golf courses.
Well, it's amazing where you go because
it's a big trickle down.
Yeah, I'm a member of a golf club, and we're packed. We're turning away members where we are. I mean, maybe it's different on Long Island than it is perhaps in other parts of the country. But I mean, there's no room.
No, I don't think it's a drop off a cliff. It's been so many years of growth, and all of a sudden, when that growth peaks, and younger people are choosing to do CrossFit and maybe just easier, accessible fitness games. It starts to take its toll.
I got to tell you, I'm really loving these millennials. I mean, too bad for the golf manufacturers, but I'm loving these millennials. Yeah. If I can get out here outside and go into my club and play around, less than 6 hours, that's great for me. Yeah. Bring back the old days.
You won't be out there by yourself. It's not a...
Well, maybe not, but keep millennials on the smartphones.
Yeah, let them be texting while you're playing.
What about if something revolutionary comes out, Adam? I mean, some sort of club that will actually make a person a better player. It doesn't exist right now.
Well, product innovation always changes categories. So part of the challenge in getting growth in the golf industry is to make sure those new clubs you gotta have them or you can't win. And so anytime there's a product innovation in any category, it fuels growth. And to some extent, that would be a positive factor in the golf industry.
Well, you know, we'll have to see exactly what happens. Right now, I'm jumping for joy, but although a moment of silence for Golfsmith and other places like that. Actually, what's surprise? Anyway, thanks so much for joining us.
Perfect topic for a Friday afternoon.
You got it. Next week on Arisexchange, crisis and brand manager of the stars, Trevor Julian stops by on the Exchange on Monday. You've been watching Arisexchange. Have a great, great day.